like, oh, that's not bad, but you can get your money up, brokey. And then she started crying. I'm like, don't let my like impositions on your value set impact your life, right? Like, you should.
Yeah, I don't know if that's how I would frame this situation. The last thing I would want somebody to describe me as is uninteresting.
It was such an enjoyment. Also, like yesterday, when I was like doing work in my car at like 5 a.m.
So if you're
certainly.
if you're immersed in it, wouldn't it be meaningful to you regardless?
That nothing is meaningful, but also that everything is meaningful.
Personal terror, which sometimes has to be applied, right?
I do think it's an interesting idea. That's not what I would use the word based for, though.
I think as a child, she's like 4.
Oh, she's 4. Oh, that was you could have included that context.
So guys,
When you say like the meaning in college, right? Versus success in college is there's not much success to going to football games, but it is meaningful, right? I don't even have a lot of school spirit myself, but watching like the UGA game was kind of impactful.
It was sad. Mostly it was sad, but I felt like that I could feel this kind of sad emotion was meaningful, you know? Because it kind of means like there was this kind of hope for me to have that kind of disappointment in the first place. So
yeah, I mean, I only watched it because all my friends were watching it, to be honest. And also like people were telling me, like people from out of state were like, it's in Georgia, it's all like Georgia fans versus Georgia Tech fans in like the center, but the rest of the world was Georgia Tech fans. So.
Oh yeah, hell yeah.
I don't know if you saw the memes, but they were pretty good.
Yeah, for me it was very much like, it was really painful because, and like being there, so it was like, it's a very visceral experience of it. It was like, it was so exciting for the first of all, the first half was just incredible. And also just like getting to make fun of all the UGA fans. Honestly, that alone was very great. But like, it was like such a painful loss at the same time when we actually lost. But I will say, even with that loss, like, I still think it's the greatest football game that I've ever like been to, certainly, and maybe the greatest I've ever seen, honestly, because I mean, just 7 overtimes, it's so crazy, right? So like, even though the ending was very painful, it was just like, that was such an incredible experience. I was glad to be able to be there.
Mm-hmm. You don't feel like the ending kind of changed the meaning of the game for you, made it slightly less or more meaningful?
I mean, I do think the ending changed the meaning for sure. The fact that it went to 7 overtimes, first of all, by itself, it also just made it so like intense. Like, everyone was just like screaming. Like, every single time Tech either scored or got a stop, I was just like jumping up and down, screaming. And then UGA fans were doing the same thing every time they scored, obviously. Like, so that just made it, and it was already an intense game, right? Even in regular time. But did it change the meaning of it? I mean, I do think it did in a way, but I wouldn't say it made it like less meaningful per se. It's still super memorable, right? That's another aspect of it. Like, I'm never gonna forget that.
Well, I feel like you have the advantage of having been there.
Yeah.
I just saw it in like my living room with all my friends, and once we lost, I was just like, all right, well, that's that, you know? And
yeah,
it was fun while it lasted.
Yeah, it's true. I had to like walk around the stadium and everything. I was like, ugh.
Defeating. Well, shall we start? Hey, I'm Zeno.
I'm Daniel.
I'm Adriano.
I'm Gayatri.
And welcome to our first real episode of the Meaning Series. So, what is the Meaning Series? The question of the meaning in life is a complicated one. In our Great Conversations Club, it is something that's like very often discussed, and I feel like we never really get like a conclusive answer. So consequently, I kind of felt like, hey, there are things that are very meaningful in life to me, and there are things that are very meaningful in life to other people. So meaning could be derived from, I don't know, music, dancing, aquamarine robotics, whatnot, right? And I feel like if we all know what can be meaningful in the world, that we kind of appreciate it more. So I guess the idea with this podcast is to just go out and see where meaningful experiences are had in the world and see what we can learn from those. So yeah, I guess starting off, what is meaning?
Well, first of all, there's sort of an implicit, like some implicit assumptions even in the description you gave just now, right? Like you're talking a lot about meaningful experiences and how can we experience meaning? How can we find meaning in the things we experience? So, do you think that meaning is inherently like tied to experience or comes from experience and various experiences?
I mean, I don't think that it has to be experience based. Like, I feel like if I build something, then of course I get some kind of meaning out of the building experience. But, you know, if I have like a working product or whatnot, then I guess the result is just as meaningful, maybe even more so.
But the result itself is meaningful. Like, even that though, I guess you could say, do you think that that's tied to like the experience that you had of getting to that place, of being able to create that product, whatever that actually means? That can mean a lot of things.
I mean, yeah, I also feel like that it's very much tied to how you experience that kind of result. Like, I remember back in high school, in Austria, we don't really have clubs in high school. And so one thing I did is that after COVID, I just basically went to one of my head teachers and said, hey, you know, how about we just have clubs in high school? You know, we have all these people that are like actually very talented and want to live out their hobbies, and why don't we do it at a school level? And the thing is, at my school, we never really had like any big inter-school activities or whatnot. So you knew your classmates and maybe some people you randomly ran into at the cafeteria, but that was about it. So then I kind of organized this club system at school, and I organized this club convention day where like, you know, all the new clubs that registered could like, kind of like with the org fair campus, right? Just obviously a lot smaller, but it was still like, I don't know, 30 clubs registered, and we had about like 800 visitors, so like half of the school. And to just see all of these people coming together and talk about the interests was just profoundly meaningful to me. I feel like that was the first time I was really proud in life.
That's the first time you were really proud in life.
Yeah.
That does sound super cool though. But it's interesting you say that's the first time you were really proud in life.
Yeah, because I feel like for most of my life I've been like chasing expectations of other people. And it was always, yeah, okay, I've achieved the goal, and I'm kind of like onto the next step. But it's not like, okay, I've really done what I wanted. And this was really like, okay, I just go out, and I feel like I can do something here on my own accord, and I can have an impact on this world. And yeah, so.
Do you feel like true meaning has to be self-motivated in that sense?
No. I mean, obviously I got a lot of, well, personal benefits out of that. Let alone the kind of control in school, you know, to just say, oh, well, you have a club, well, I kind of, you know, can put a good word in for you, etc. But I have no clue how the clubs are doing. Maybe they've all died out, you know. So I've handed all of that off to the next generation, and they have now handed off the next generation of people. So I'm wondering how it's still ongoing. But if I knew that, you know, people were still like pursuing their extracurricular activities and finding together, I wouldn't have a lot of personal benefit out of, like, I guess, the meaningful experiences. And if that kind of meaningful experience of the feeling of having achieved something, if that is for your own personal benefit, then I guess it's inseparable from your own personal drives.
Yeah, if anything, I almost think that, like, the idea of self-motivated meaning is certainly interesting, but I feel like I get a greater sense of, like, meaning specifically from other people almost, or at least, like, in relation to other people. I mean, I would say, at least for me, like, it is a bit, like, I do have a lot of thoughts about it. I definitely get, like, a great sense of, like, beauty and, like, things that are very interesting when it's by myself, but, like, I do feel like a lot of times, if it's meaning in particular, that it tends to relate more to other people for me.
I would agree. As someone who cooks a lot, I feel like when I make food for myself, I can make it taste good, but I'm definitely not putting as much love and as much care into it as I do when I'm making food for someone else, you know. I think it's because it's like a gift. It's I'm not sure, perhaps like gift is the wrong word, but it is more meaningful to me to put effort into rather than if it's something that I'm doing for myself. I know what I'm capable of. There's no point in like going above and beyond though when all I need is nutrients, right?
Yeah, because I guess if you cook for other people, you create so much more than just a nutrient-dense meal, right? Because you, I guess, create this atmosphere, the spaces for conversation, the spaces for community, so to say. So, yeah. I mean, talking about meaningful experiences and like first having these meaningful experiences coming from achievement, etc., do you feel like there is also just meaningful experiences that have like no, I guess, value, as people would call it, like this kind of success value, you know? Like, I feel like college, on one hand, of course, you know, you're supposed to focus on your grades and getting all your projects in and collecting all the like bullet points for your resume, etc., etc. But I feel like you can get just as much meaning, maybe more, out of like a random 4 a.m. like walk and talk and just. I guess this is a lot more like relationship based, as you've mentioned. It's not something that I, you know, if I'm up at 4 a.m, then probably whatever I'm doing is like either like very cramped into my schedule and I don't find it too enjoyable or too meaningful. But if it's something I do with other people, and it's like often like some of the best times I've had that week.
Yeah, that's completely fair. I would say, if anything, I wouldn't say that most stuff that's like involved in like more like what you're saying of like success, or we could even say like productivity or something like that, or just like work in general, I wouldn't like say I find a ton of meaning from those things in general, at least like on their own. Like for me, I really like math because I think it's very interesting, and so like whenever I'm able to find the work interesting, then like being able to like figure out a problem or something like that is very satisfying. Like if I get stuck on a proof for a while and I don't understand how I'm going to prove something, and then I like sit on it for a while, I think about it for a while, and then I figure out some like there's a bit of a eureka moment or something, that's very satisfying, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't say that like just doing work on its own feels very meaningful at all, like inherently.
I agree, and oftentimes when it's work that you don't want to do, I feel like the meaning is getting done with the work. Like I often look forward to, if you're like dieting, for example, you may hate the process, but you may like the conclusion, and that's what actually is giving it its meaning.
Yeah, I feel like if we separated those into two categories, like work that you just like are mentally rewarded for completion, and work that you actually enjoy. I feel like the latter half is one I can do without music. Like I can just sit there and just run through it. Like I'm so entertained just by working on it that I don't need like any more entertainment, I guess, in the background. But if something I love, I just put on songs to mentally distract me. I mean, obviously try not to distract me too much so I can still get the work done, but
yeah,
I guess put my mind off the thoughts that there is like so much other stuff that I would want to be doing right now instead.
Yeah, I feel that with like having background entertainment to make your activity more digestible. Like I always have a background show while I'm doing work, not because it increases my productivity. In fact, it probably doesn't, but
yeah,
I'm more likely to actually finish my work if I can look up, have something else to distract myself with, be mildly entertained, and then get back to work, right?
Yeah.
I really like, that aspect that you're saying of like getting lost in something. Like it's I don't know if it's exactly meaningful though, but I would say that I really absolutely love this idea of like getting so lost in whatever you're doing in the moment that you're not thinking about anything else. You're so distracted by something that you can't worry about anything, right? Like for me, one really common version is basketball, right? If I'm playing a basketball game, I'm not worrying about anything except basketball. There is nothing else on my mind, right? At least if it's a good game.
Right. I mean, you're tall enough, so yeah.
Yeah.
No, I do fully get that. I also feel like that's not just in like work and enjoyment you do. It's also like in religion. I feel like the best services is like one thing. So I've been to a lot of like different religious services over the last year or so. And one thing I've noticed is that like for these Orthodox churches that go on for like 3-4 hours, whatever, you do not know when they end, right? So you really get lost in it, right? But then compared to a more contemporary service where like, okay, this is scheduled for 1 hour and consequently I've scheduled like lunch directly after. And if they go 1 minute over, I can't make my plans. So like really getting lost is such an enjoyment. Also like yesterday when I was like doing work in my car at like 5 a.m., I was just so, of course, it kind of helped that I had nothing better to do, and I was kind of forced in a situation to do it. But once I was lost, like the fact that I was in my car at 5 a.m. and had to wait another 2 hours to get out, it just didn't matter anymore. I just got work done. It was so joyful. Yeah,
it's interesting what you said, Daniel, that like it doesn't necessarily matter if it's meaningful if you're immersed in it, but I feel like I would say meaning is a very personal thing. So if you're immersed in it, wouldn't it be meaningful to you regardless?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, it's a bit of a complicated answer or like a complicated question just because I do think I have sort of a weird relationship with meaning as a whole. Like, I tend to think that it's both true that nothing is meaningful, but also that everything is meaningful. Like, I don't necessarily tend to think of meaning as, yeah, I don't know. I would say like that's kind of how I already put it. Really, like either in some sense like nothing is meaningful and there is no meaning, so I just live my life without worrying about meaning. But also that I get meaning from literally everything I do and from every moment of my life. Not necessarily like that it's that I'm getting equal meaning from each moment or something like that, but it's just like everything is meaningful. You know, I don't necessarily divide it into like some things are meaningful and some things aren't. Although it does feel like there are like, especially if I'm like on my phone like playing a game or like looking at reels or something, it does feel like I'm just kind of like passing the time, you know, like, and I do think that ties back to the whole thing about like getting lost in the moment but also embracing the moment, right? Like if I'm just staring at my phone, like am I really embracing that moment? Am I really like fully diving into everything that I'm experiencing? And I do think this is an interesting aspect, right? Because I was talking about like playing basketball, right? Certainly something like that is a lot easier to get into a flow state or in the zone. I wonder if it's more possible to achieve that in almost every moment of your life, right? To really fully be present in every moment and fully embrace every moment, right?
I think people definitely can. I think that's a bit of a like carefree approach to life. If you're always if you're always focused on whatever it is you're currently doing, I feel like you're maybe lacking a bit of depth to everything else that you should be doing.
Yeah, like you lose a certain like overview or accountability or stuff.
But I say that as someone that likely has ADHD, so I'm always like thinking about something else. So it's very hard for me to be locked in and present in the moment all the time. But I wouldn't say that's any less meaningful. I would say like I try to.
Wait, I'm sorry. Did you say you feel like because of that you are less locked in on every moment or more locked in?
Oh, absolutely less locked in.
Less.
I'm very easily distracted by everything I'm doing. But the way I think about my distractions is that I'm always trying to reprioritize them for like optimization, let's say, to be like the most impactful, the most meaningful. Like let's say if I need to get up and I need to make breakfast and make coffee, I'm not going to make coffee or make breakfast. I'm going to boil water and then I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do that and then I'm going to do this and then it's a whole bunch of things. And you would say that maybe that detracts from the meaningfulness of each individual action. But I would say, I don't know, man. I can't do much else besides that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't know. Is that actually any different though? Like, or like, because if you're still locked in on doing all of these things, what I more mean is like, you're focused on all of these things and these tasks versus being focused about like more like, your life in general, you know, versus like you are focused on all of these things instead of just like worrying about, I don't know, all your problems in life more generally.
Although I feel if you juggle so many things, you have a lot more worry than if you're just locked in on one thing. Like for example, I do also feel that
what? Say it again.
a lot more worry.
Worry?
Yeah, because like analogous to your coffee thing, like if I have, sometimes I try to complete like 5 tasks at the same time. You know, sometimes I like also have to wait for like certain stuff to load, to generate, to whatnot, and then I guess I'm also in this sort of flow state to get stuff done. But it's also like there's so many different aspects to focus on that I also cannot dive into like a lot of them. But also I feel like there's some kind of tasks that you just cannot dive into, at least in the way that I execute them. So I feel like sometimes it's fine to not be fully locked in. I feel like if you really could live a life that's fully locked in, like that's great for you. But I think it's, at least for me, it's currently unattainable.
Yeah, and when you say locked in, what would that exactly mean in this context?
I guess to dive into the subject matter that greatly that you...
To be present in the moment.
To be in that kind of flow state we talked about.
Yeah.
Although I feel like the problem with the term locked in is that it's always used in a negative connotation. Like, we've been brain rotting for the last couple hours and now we really need to lock in. And then you try to lock in and you really try to force yourself to, but you just can't get yourself to. And it's like so forceful and it's like not, the kind of flow state. It's just like personal terror. Which sometimes has to be applied, right? if you're bad with deadlines, like I am.
Yeah.
So,
As am I. As am I.
But you can be locked in for other things, right? Imagine if you didn't have to do work, you'd be locked in on a video game, or you're locked in on a book you're reading. And these sorts of things are applicable, right?
yeah, I also feel like they're a lot more meaningful than like kind of like, I guess, brain rotting, as people will call it. Like, sometimes, you know, I procrastinate and I don't do work, and I actually realize, okay, the last 2 hours I was just on my phone. Now, if I actually just spend 1 hour like away from work and like playing some kind of video game or reading some kind of book or listening to some kind of whatever, then I would have gotten a lot more meaning out of that, and then an hour would have like provided me so much more utility than 2 hours of whatever the hell I just did.
That's a fair point. That is, I feel like it depends on what your goal is with these sort of entertainments. Because, I would say, personally speaking, that I think that short form entertainment is sort of bad for you, and you should prioritize sort of longer form things. But if you're just using it as like a brief reprieve, and you're in control, like, oh, I'm gonna do 5 quick scrolls and then get back to work, and if that's how you make it more digestible,
If you manage 5 quick scrolls.
yeah, that's the thing, right? Or if you go to the bathroom, I feel like that's a perfectly acceptable time to go on TikTok and what else you're gonna do. But if your goal is to have things that you enjoy in your free time, and like deep down that you're not getting any enjoyment from TikTok, it's just something that you're spending the time with, you should compel yourself to do something that you want to do. And that maybe has a barrier to entry. It's not as easy as just scrolling on your For You page, right? You have to go get your book, you have to sit down and read, and where did you leave off, and these sorts of things. But if you want to do that, you should take meaningful steps toward it, right?
I think that like short scroll is maybe more harmful.
It's also
than
so
you're expressing.
accessible, right?
I think, and I'm not saying this certainly as like I say this as somebody that spends an excessive amount of time on Instagram Reels, certainly, don't get me wrong. But I do think that even that short scroll is, and I'm not super familiar with all the neuroscience side of it, but from my understanding, it is pretty impactful, even that short scroll. What's especially impactful, which I'm in a horrible habit of doing, is just waking up and going on Instagram immediately.
But it's so accessible, right? Because I feel like I kind of have a problem with reading. I don't read enough. But I feel like if I actually pick up a book and get into it, then I could like read for 2 hours, no problem, right? But the problem is that I do not like pick up the book, and it is so easy to just open Instagram or something, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And I feel like another factor that kind of plays into is FOMO, because like I feel like sometimes to really understand the current culture's humor and what's going on, and all the like metaphysical memes, etc., you have to be sort of in the loop. And I feel like that feeling is
FOMO for that?
A bit. I mean, not a lot, but sometimes I just feel old. Like I don't understand Gen Alpha anymore. Like their humor is just beyond me.
Yeah.
But
I think I'm pretty okay with that.
Yeah, I mean that definitely. But like other example, Twitter.
Okay.
I feel like the problem is I know that I waste way too much time on Twitter. X, yeah, whatever. I feel like if I so often I'm on Twitter, and if I think to myself, man, the last like 20 posts were like an absolute waste of my time. But then I get one post. And it actually has some interesting stuff. Like, for example, I randomly saw a random graph that was posted on some discussion below the graph, and this actually perfectly fit into my research. So now I could now extend my research through that. But the problem is, I now kind of feel like, okay, if I want to have like the most holistic worldview, I kind of now need to waste 40 out of 60 minutes I spend on Twitter just to find these like seldom moments of connection.
Yeah, but why would you want to be connected to like the mass media culture? Like that's your choice to. I feel like by wanting to do that, you're making up for a different choice. Like you could just find a sense of community elsewhere, right? I mean, why should you feel compelled to be on on Twitter or on X and seeing what people are saying?
That's fair, but I'm just too intrigued by the community and by like what technological change drives people to do. Not always in a good manner, but in an interesting manner.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely understand the aspect of like wanting to see what other people think, that kind of part. Like every time that I'm scrolling Instagram, I almost always check the comments.
Yeah, the comments, right?
On every video, because I just want to know what other people think.
It's also kind of about community, because you open a reel and you're like, oh, I have this exact thought, but now I want to know if other people have this exact thought. And I open a comment, and the first comment is exactly my exact thought. And I feel like, I feel like part of something bigger. I feel like I'm not alone. I'm out there with a bunch of other strangers in this interconnected universe across the globe.
Really?
Although which is kind of sad because in reality we don't do anything great. We just have the same subconscious principles, but
Yeah, and it's even hard to say, like, does that indicate more so that a similarity between you, or is it more of a similarity in the platform itself and the videos itself, and like the fact that it's like I don't know, somehow influencing you to have like similar thoughts about this content and stuff like that?
I think that kind of idea comes from both ends, because it's like these sorts of videos and these For You pages, they're kind of tailored towards your taste. So it's probably just going to be you and people like you are going to watch the same videos because you guys have similar interests, right?
Yeah, it's dialectical TikTokism. You form your algorithm, but your algorithm also forms you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Which, I mean, kind of should converge in nothingness at some point. It's kind of like with AI art, if it's always like retrain on itself, then, like, honestly, between like, have you ever used like Dolly 2?
Yes.
A little bit, yes.
I felt like creating images with Dolly 3 is so much worse than Dolly 2 because like it's been trained on itself more or less, and like everything is like this super idealistic, perfect, uncannily perfect depiction of whatever you try to generate. But there's no art, there's no fun, there's no imperfection, there's nothing joyful about it.
I remember using Dolly in the relatively early days. I guess it was like 2.5 years ago now, before they had all the like extra editing and stuff. That was actually pretty fun because it was like I felt like in order to like get the image that I want, I would have to like, because you could only make squares. So it's like if I wanted to make like a phone lock screen or something, I have to like get like 3 squares. So I'd have to like figure out a way to get it to like actually patch together what I want. Like actually required some work from me. Whereas now it does kind of feel like you just like type a few words and it's over. But to be fair, I don't think it was requiring an insane amount of creativity in the first place either.
But you're still putting in effort.
Yeah.
Would you say that made it more impactful because you felt like your labor went into the product that you get in the end?
Yeah, impactful is a word for it. It just made it more fun, honestly, because it felt like I was actually doing something.
That's fair.
But yeah, it was kind of satisfying. Like, it was like, and it's also like, because you're having to make like multiple images and stuff, like you're only using a sliver of the last one, so you really don't know what to expect. So like, you have to like play around with it a little bit, all this kind of stuff. I think that made it a lot more fun.
Yeah, talking about that, like having this kind of like meaningful part in the process, not being completely estranged from your product, so to say. Do we need meaning in the first place? Couldn't we just, like rot away and be fine?
Well, is that the alternative though? I really don't know that that's the alternative.
Might not be, no. What would our alternatives be in your...
Well, first of all, what is like, when you say meaning, right? Is that like trying to live in a meaningful way, or is that living your life and then deriving meaning afterwards? Or maybe aspects of both, certainly. But
I guess both, yeah.
I feel like as people, you would be hard-pressed to not find meaning in your decisions. You always want to justify your existence, so to speak. But at the same time, I feel like a lot of people misunderstand the meaningful aspects of their own lives. Like, how often do you think about your like formative years? Probably not a lot, but they were certainly very impactful into the person you developed into today, right?
And another aspect of that is, this is related to meaning. I don't think it's exactly the same as meaning. I think for some people this is very much their idea of meaning. For other people, it might not be. But a lot of times we do all kinds of things, right? Sure, like just in many situations we might act in different ways. We make various decisions, right? And we have these ideas of like, this is why I did this. I did this because of this thing, right? I think a lot of times we're lying to ourselves when we say that like, this is why I did this thing, or I did this thing because of this particular reason. I think that we tend to over-attribute our reasoning behind our decisions. The reality is everything is so multifaceted. Do you really understand your own thinking processes that well to understand why you did something?
I guess that's just cope, because you do kind of want to feel like you're the writer of your own story, right? You feel like everything kind of has to tie up. Like if you look back at your own life story, you would like to say, okay, well, this is actually all, as some people said, it was all God's plan. It all kind of made sense in the end. And although I think that definitely everything kind of makes sense in the end, I don't think that, I do agree that we attributed it to the wrong reasons. Because I definitely feel like there were just times in my life where I would make suboptimal decisions. And in hindsight, I'd say, oh, well, but actually this led me to this other thing. So it was actually better, although it might not have been, right?
Yeah, so actually, here's what I would say, right? I think that in a way, the natural conclusion of what I said would be like that because of that actually we're over-attributing meaning, and therefore the most accurate thing to do would be to not attribute meaning to anything, right? Or just like, or at least be like, and the reality is we don't know what anything means, right? And I do think it's true that we don't know what anything means. But I don't think that, this ties back to what I was saying before about how I find meaning in nothing and everything. Yes, one side of that is ultimately whatever meaning we're attributing isn't like the meaning. It's not the objective meaning, at least in my opinion. It isn't the objective meaning of everything. But that also means that there's nothing wrong with everything being meaningful. Of like, whatever like meaning that you think something has is correct, right? But it also means that whatever meaning someone else has for that thing is also correct, right? And that everything you do is meaningful. Everything that happens to you is meaningful. And that like you can also just go the complete opposite direction and say that it does all mean something, right? And that whatever mistakes you made, it is really true though. Whatever mistakes you made did lead you to be wherever you are, right?
Yeah.
So I have a similar thought process as well, where I would say like as like in the STEM field, like we know what things are, but we don't necessarily know what things mean. I would say that meaning is a completely personal thing. Things are meaningless to you until you attribute some sort of connection to them. And then they're also contributing some sort of connection to you, right? Relationships, for example, aren't completely one-sided, but it's your choice to attribute meaning to it. And then otherwise a complete stranger, that would mean nothing to you.
Right. So for you, meaning is just like a set of weights that everybody personalizes.
Not necessarily. I don't know how much choice you have in all your personalizations. For example, like you would probably love your parents unless they did something particularly heinous just because you're programmed to, but you also choose to love like your partner, for example. That's not something you're programmed to do. That's a choice that you actively make, I would say.
Yeah. Also, Daniel, as you mentioned that like everything kind of is meaningful, do you feel like we could judge meaning or like rank meaning or saying this thing was more meaningful than the other in your worldview?
Well, I don't know. I don't want to speak too much for anyone else, but I don't think it's very helpful to try to rank meaning. I don't think meaning is very much quantifiable. I really don't think, and I don't think meaning is like a thing that we have to judge in comparison to other forms of meaning, right? I think, I don't know, I honestly don't know that I even like think that much about meaning specifically. I tend to think a lot more about like beauty and like, wow, it's really beautiful that this happened, or like it almost like seems like things had to happen this way. Or I guess there is an aspect though of like, it does sometimes feel like there are some things where it's like it was meant to happen this way, which, I mean, I did use the word meant there, right? So maybe that does imply a kind of meaning.
So would you rank beauty? Would you say that this thing was more beautiful than the other?
Not at all.
So like, I guess my question then is like, sometimes I feel like I really had meaningless days, or like at least to compare to what I would have wanted to get out of the day, it was kind of meaningless. And I'm just wondering that if everything has the same kind of meaning to you, then I guess how do you strive towards doing what is better for you? Because like my kind of view is like, of course, like in the past I would always like strive to do what's leading me to more success, but nowadays I'm striving to like do stuff, obviously keeping my success and all of my other projects in check, but also like doing more stuff that's like meaningful to me. So then like, is there any reason to put down your phone and like read a book or play a game or watch or do something with friends instead?
Yeah, is there a reason to? That's an interesting question. I think for me personally, I don't necessarily need like, I think a reason can be very helpful, right? Especially if you're like feeling like stuck and a meaning or some kind of reason is able to get you out of that, then there is a lot of value in that. I also think for me, I almost like principally believe that like for me, a big thing is like I want to make my life more interesting, right? So
Mhm.
like whatever I can do to make my life more interesting, anything which will make my life more interesting, I'm going to have a strong preference towards that, right?
What is your motivation to do that? To just have more lore, I guess?
Honestly, it's just like I think I've just, you know, maybe I'm tempted to say I've always felt that way, but I think I've felt that way for a really long time, and I don't know exactly like why that started or even necessarily why I feel that way. It's just like to me, like I don't know. I've always loved things that are interesting, right? Learning things that are interesting, doing things that are interesting, experiencing things that are interesting. That to me has always been something which is extremely important.
When you say interesting, are you saying things that you just haven't experienced before, or what do you mean by interesting? It seems quite.
Yeah, I think that can be a big aspect of it. New experiences certainly can be extremely interesting, but it doesn't have to be a new experience. I do think that new experiences tend to be more interesting, maybe. But to me, anything which is interesting is just like, it's very similar to the idea of like excitement, like, but it doesn't, I guess, have to be exciting. Like, it's honestly more of just a feeling of like, wow, this is so interesting. Like, I want to, like, how would I describe it? Like, if I'm interested in something, it's just like it is almost ties back to the thing of like completely embracing that of like, wow, this, like if it's an interesting fact, you know, like wow, this is super interesting. I want to learn more about this. I want to talk about this with other people. If it's an interesting experience, like I want to experience this again maybe, but I also want to like completely embrace this. But I also just like have this appreciation of like, this is so interesting. Or like if I like when I'm just walking around and I see something really interesting or see something really interesting happen. I'm like, that's so cool. Like, that's just so interesting.
I hear you. I have a similar like thought process when I just walk around. I think of like the story behind something, or I like to think like poetic. What's like the story behind this? I remember last summer I was walking around DC, and there was just two sets of ballet shoes by the door of some random house. It was like a grown woman's pair, and then like a small children's pair. And I was like, oh, that's cute. It's either like an older sister, younger sister, or like a mother and daughter both learning ballet. You know, and this is just a pair of shoes. I don't think they thought anyone else was going to see it, but I see that I'm like, oh, that's sweet. That's poetic, right? That's like a family bonding experience.
Yeah, like I would describe that as being like, oh, that is super interesting. It almost like something being interesting like draws more out of you. Maybe in this case, it draws more thought out of you. Like, oh, like what happened? Like why is this the case?
Mm-hmm.
But like it somehow in some way or other brings more out of you. That's what something being interesting is to me.
So would you say that being interested in something is like your primary drive in life? Or like having interesting experiences?
It's a good question. I don't know that I have a primary drive in life, to be honest. But I think that's a huge like drive for many of my actions, certainly. One thing I don't know. I don't think that I have like any particular like singular drive though. You know, I think that, and it can also vary a lot. You know, maybe that is something which is driving me temporarily. But there are other aspects too, certainly. One thing I've been trying to do more recently is like things that are more challenging, or like I think when I don't even know if it's something that I've been doing that much. Something that I at least think would be wise for me to do is like try to do things that scare you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I guess it's not really like a drive, a motivation thing. I don't know. I do think I'm very extrinsically motivated. Like a lot of my motivation does come from other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I do feel like I am also, especially like in my past couple of years, I've been very like motivated by, okay, I really want to see what's going on here, you know, I'm curious to see how something develops. And I feel like I've kind of overstayed in a lot of those scenarios where I felt like just because I was curious, I took things to sort of dramatic proportions that were like unnecessary, just because I was so curious to find out what would happen if things went a certain way. So
like just a
like for example, if there were two options to, I don't know, live my life, and one of them was, you know, like great and like also meaningful, but the other one was more interesting, then I would often pursue the more interesting options that would maybe, you know, like create more interesting stories to tell, but ultimately leave me in a worse position for creating more meaning later on in life.
Yeah, that's very reasonable. This reminds me of a thought I had. I think the worst the last thing I would want somebody to describe me as is uninteresting. And not necessarily like boring. If someone said I was boring, I'd be like, okay, they're probably just don't like the things that I like.
Right, yeah.
Like, that's fine. If someone said I was uninteresting, that would be devastating.
Yeah. I would hate to be called predictable.
Predictable.
I mean, I feel like I could live with predictable, honestly, for me.
I mean,
why is predictable particularly bad for you?
I don't know. I want to be like, if you look at someone and you can judge them superficially, right? And then you get to know them and they're exactly as you guessed that they would be. I feel like that seems terrible.
I mean, isn't that just plastic? Isn't that just plastic? I feel like, okay, so what if I, instead of predictable, described you would? I also kind of see as a synonym as based. In the, you know, like contemporary kind of meaning.
Yeah.
Would you be unhappy with that?
Probably.
Because to me, like, base is the kind of, I know it's stupid, right? But it's like the kind of the best, like, I feel like a lot of these terms that arise in the internet culture are just because there's just no other term to describe them. And to me, base is kind of like when you kind of have a backbone. When I feel like whatever you do, even if I disagree with your decision is aligned with your principles. So it's like you kind of have some integrity. And it doesn't mean that it's a good thing. It's just that, yeah.
I do think it's an interesting idea. That's not what I would use the word based for, though. I feel like based just means something you agree with.
Yeah. I feel like you can be consistent and still not be predictable. Like, you can have ideologically consistent principles that align with your actions. But if you're like...
predictable, that probably means that your principles are shallow. Is that what you're getting at?
Probably. I feel like that's a good way of putting it.
Casey, what do you think the last thing you'd want to be described as is?
No idea at all.
We could like describe you in a bunch of ways. You say what you'd like to be.
That's wild. I would not like to be described.
What if I called you broke? Brokey over here.
I am broke, so not even.
I mean, being broke is better than being poor, isn't it?
They are different. I do think they're different.
I also do think they're different.
I mean, I wouldn't say being poor is a bad thing.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing.
I mean, it's like a bad thing in the sense that you don't want to be poor, but it's not like a criticism of somebody for me to call them poor.
I mean, do you know this one Dave Chappelle clip where he's like he's complaining to his dad that they're poor and they can't afford stuff, and he's like you know, Dave, you're not poor, like you're broke. Poor is like an attitude or something like that, and I mean, not wanting to discredit anybody, but.
Yeah, I probably have seen that clip, to be honest, although I don't remember it super well. I mean, I was about to talk about the difference between being poor and broke, although I think it's not super relevant. So maybe we shouldn't spend time on that specifically.
How much is mindset?
That's all I can think.
How much is mindset really worth? And how much is mindset tied to meaning?
I don't know. The thing is with mindset is you can't let other people kind of define your mindset. You can't let other people define your values. Kind of a case in point. I over Christmas, I thought I was just messing around with my niece, but I kept calling her Brokey because she only got $20 for Christmas, and I was like, oh, that's not bad, but you can get your money up, Brokey. And then she started crying. I'm like, don't let my like impositions on your value set impact your life, right? Like, you should.
Yeah, I don't know if that's how I would frame this situation.
Maybe I thought we were just joking around, but I think we took it a little too seriously.
Well, the reality is. Okay, I shouldn't say the reality because I didn't see the situation. I don't know her, and I'm not living inside of her head, right? I would be very tempted to imagine that if you calling her broke and brokey led to her like crying, that there probably was a lot more going on internally there.
Oh, I thought you were supposed to say like, oh, there's some kind of substance.
Some kind of substance?
No.
Oh, like she is actually broke? No. I mean, no, but really, the fact that she only got $20 for Christmas might have bothered her or something like that is more along the lines of what I'm saying. Of like, she probably somehow was like, that was something which actually stuck with her, right? Because if she just didn't care about that at all, it's hard to imagine that would have bothered her. Either that or you just like worked her down to a point
I feel like
where it was something she started to internalize in some way.
Probably more just cared about like what I was saying, and it felt like disrespectful to her, so she was sad about it, which I get. Like,
you don't think there was like she was already upset
I don't
about
think-
that though? You think that was just?
I think as a child, she's like 4.
How? Oh, she's 4.
She didn't really have-
You could have included that context.
She doesn't have like an extensive concept of value, right?
Yeah, I didn't know she was 4.
Maybe
But that's definitely because you
she's
said the
6.
word
She's 6.
brokey.
She's 6.
You don't even
She's
know how old
6?
your niece is?
I know still.
I have two nieces.
That's even worse. You only have
I guess
two
it's
nieces.
interesting. Yeah. I guess I also have to keep in mind, I guess when you said niece, for some reason I was imagining cousin. I don't know what it'd be like to have a niece or nephew.
Oh yeah.
Because my brother is like younger than me, so like that seems very far off. The concept of like a niece or nephew feels so weird to me. Because you're like young, like.
Oh, it's not.
But-
I guess it's my first cousin's child. Well, I
That
call
was
them
what I
my
was
niece.
thinking.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Then you would be. Are you
Cousin
there?
once removed or something. I
Yeah,
don't know.
you would be
I
their
call them-
first cousin once removed, I believe.
Cousin?
No, second cousin once removed. I
or
believe.
uncle?
No, he'd be their second cousin once removed.
in America. I
oh.
just say uncle because it's easy.
That's completely valid. Yeah, that's completely valid. I don't know why technically, I'm 90% sure you would be their second cousin once removed. Maybe their first cousin once removed. Doesn't really matter though.
Either way, I feel like she cried because you just said brokey rather than a deeper,
Yeah, I
deeper
mean-
meaning.
Yeah.
Probably,
Personally,
probably.
I feel like, you know, I love to be in an environment where I know I can say the most outrageous stuff ever and it doesn't bother people.
Yeah.
I've just unfortunately had to realize that I am not very often in those kind of environments.
Yeah.
And people take things way too personally. So,
So I tell my niece.
When you're saying outrageous, I do also have some more thoughts on the niece stuff, definitely. But when you say outrageous, are you imagining like outrageous in the sense that it's like towards somebody personally, making personal comments about them, but for them to not take it personally, versus like more just in general saying something?
I feel like both.
Outrageous.
So definitely the personal part is a big thing because, you know, you really need to be able to have your stuff together in order to stomach like some, you know, like sharper comments. But
Stuff together isn't exactly how I'd put it, but go on.
And like the other part would be like, you know, if there's something that you should not really say in a context that's like really inappropriate, but there's some people that are just very, very sensitive to that. And it is
Yeah.
very fun to screw with them in that way. But yeah,
Yeah.
not always the best course of action. And I feel like I've although I really want to be kind of like consistent in my actions, I'm a bit too like realpolitik for that. So I say like I should very much adapt to my environment.
Yeah. I do also wonder, like, if the whole, it's almost like rage bait, right? Of like,
Yeah,
you're just getting
rage bait
the
is only fun
enjoyment.
if you can bait people.
Yeah.
If it's like if you know that it will, I mean, but then again, it doesn't bring like harmony to the entire situation. Like I feel like that kind of like, I guess outrageous comments are more fun if like you have friends that will laugh about it
Yeah.
with you together, like compared to, oh well, I'll say the most offensive thing to somebody who will take like great offense to that, which might be like fun to you, but
Yeah, I think that's almost like, not to, I did kind of cut you off.
no, like I guess it's too it's a bit sinister.
Sinister, yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's like
think
Schadenfreude, you
it's
know?
almost like, yeah, I think what you're describing of like really trying to like actually bother people is like, it's kind of just a way to make you feel better about yourself.
Yeah.
Of like,
You feel superior. Like,
Yeah.
oh, this doesn't bother me, but you know?
yeah, like
It's
that's versus like, I think that there is a great joy in like saying something that you know is gonna make someone angry, and then they're gonna laugh about it afterwards.
Yeah.
I think that is very like funny.
I feel like it depends on like the context you have with your friends. Like if it's,
Yeah.
you shouldn't. If, like I say, rage bait versus like incitement. And if you're like
Incitement.
like if you're talking to a stranger, you should be aware that you might like elevate their mood to a certain level. But if it's with your friends, you shouldn't really like push. Like whatever you're rage baiting them about is not going to exceed like the friendship that you have, right? It may be like a temporary, like, oh, how could you hate my favorite TV show or whatever, and obviously you're just like messing with them, but you know that at the end of the day, it's not really relevant to like your friendship as a whole.
Mhm.
And that doesn't really apply to strangers, so you kind of have to like know your audience, so to speak.
Yeah, I feel like somebody could say anything to me as long as it's like actually about me, and I would forgive them for it. Versus if they were to like say something, even if it's really hurtful, you know, I think there might be like a line where if it went too far, then I would be like, okay, I don't really want to be friends with this person. It just kind of changes how I view them. even then, I think I would like forgive them, but I would kind of just say like, okay, I'm gonna forgive you, but I don't really want to talk to you anymore.
I mean, I guess it also like comes down to the intentions, right? If you feel like, oh, they just say to insult you, right? Versus they just say to, to have a laugh at your expense. I feel like that's more forgivable because, it might be annoying, but then again, they had the intention of creating laughter, so to say. Which, I mean, could depends. Like run to humiliation, right? And that's like negative again, right? But if you can actually, I guess, embrace that, then yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to bring up is that it's harder for me to forgive, like, what people are saying about other people in a way. Mm-hmm. It definitely depends on, like, the extent of that, because on the other hand, I would kind of prefer people to give their actual opinions versus, like, feeling like they have to...
Self-censor.
Yeah, like, self-censor. But, like, if somebody does have, like... I'm not sure exactly how I'd phrase it. Like...
I mean, for me, it's kind of like, okay, do I say something about a different person because it concerns me and I feel like we should, maybe help them or, like, get somebody else involved, or... Maybe it's just bothering me so much that, I want to discuss it with somebody, or do I really just want to trash talk them to feel better about myself? I
do think it's, like, completely fine for people to need to vent. Something like that isn't really what I'm talking about here. It's more like if somebody were to, for example, have, like, a genuinely hateful opinion about someone else. See, even then, like, it's really complicated because, like, there are plenty of situations where I do completely understand it. It is very situational. But, I'm, like, struggling to find the exact words for the scenario that I'm thinking of.
Yeah, you kind of lost me.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, I think the main part that I was getting at is, like, I do think for me, I'm able to, for the most part, not take stuff super personally. For me, this is a slightly different direction, but I think this is very interesting. I'm usually not hurt by, like, somebody trying to insult me or, like, say something mean to me. Whether it's a joke or not really doesn't even matter that much. If somebody's insulting me, it's, like, whatever. For one aspect, if they're genuinely mad at me, first of all, I'm like, that's probably coming more from them. Mm-hmm. Like, it's probably more something about them. Either they're insecure, maybe they're in a bad mood, or maybe it's, like, even, like, so the thing that they're insulting in me is something that they hate about themselves. Something like that, right? Or they could just be in a bad mood. It doesn't have to be that deep. But in some way, it's not, like, personal to me. Versus what actually hurts me is when somebody says something about me without even, like, processing it. Like, they don't even clock it. They don't even realize that what they said is something that would bother me or something that was, like... I'm like, because that's what they really think. Because they're not even, like... To them, that's not even, like, notable. Like, they didn't even realize that that's something that might be hurtful to
So if they put, like,
that.
effort into insulting you...
somebody's, like, trying to insult me, like... Whatever, I mean, like, that's kind of funny in a way, or maybe it's just,
about
like...
you,
whatever. If somebody says something that's, like... Or maybe it's not even... It doesn't even have to be, like, a thing about me. What if they're, like, talking about somebody else, and then I'm like, that's literally me. Mm-hmm. Like, that... Something like that would be way more hurtful to me.
Yeah, fair. Is fun and entertainment around it, is that meaningful?
Is that meaningful?
I think so. Most people... If you like it, I would say it's meaningful, and most people like... fun things, right?
And, like, how would you differentiate that from,
Is this a different direction, by the way? We're just I might have slightly misheard the question.
Yeah, I'm trying to, like,
Okay, yeah, of course. Just say the question again.
Yeah, okay, so, is, I guess, fun and laughter and, all that kind of entertainment in that area, is that meaningful? And I guess as a follow-up, like, how do we, like, discern, like, real, like, a really good time, like, for example, going to a comedy show, to, like, seeing two, like, clips of Family Guy with, like, Subway Surfer gameplay in the bottom.
What's more meaningful than laughter? Honestly, I can't think of a lot of things which would be more meaningful than laughter.
And I feel like the thing with laughter and, like, the idea of comedy is it makes you think, like, good. You're saying, like, what's the difference between, like, a meaningful, like, comedy show versus just, like, watching Family Guy? I would say is that they make you think, right? There's a reason they had, like, jester's privilege back in the day, whereas you could say whatever you want as long as it's sufficiently funny and constructive,
right,
the king, right? And I would say it's important to have these sort of, like, thresholds of, like, you can't say this unless it's funny. You can't say this unless it's
Right, because it has to be like really thought out to be funny, right?
Yeah.
Especially the more offensive
Does
it
it?
gets. I mean,
I
not
feel like all
always.
of
Okay,
my
sometimes
fun-
it could be like it could be like the stupidest thing ever. Like I feel like if you're in some kind of
Yeah.
like heat or situation, and
Well,
out
there's
of,
that
out of
aspect of
instinct,
it.
somebody like throws in the most like out of pocket comment ever. They just
Yeah.
that they came to them like in an instant. That could be super funny. But I feel like in that situation, it's like super funny because they kind of hit the point in that scenario, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I do think there definitely can be like that aspect of it, like almost lowbrow humor, we could say, or just like low effort humor, or maybe like it can always be really funny to see your friend's reaction to something. You're sitting in class, the teacher says something that's like no one really even clocks it, but then you look over at your friend and they're like trying to contain their laughter, something like that. I do think there's a very like simple humor in that, which that itself I think personally, it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't always have to be that deep. Also, even like some of my like, I do feel like for me a lot of times like the funniest things that I can think of are like, it's not like I had to like really like think about it and come to this joke. It's just like it just came to. I just instantly had it in mind, and it even can be something which is a bit more like complex or has layers to it, right? But it's just like I just knew it just came to. I'm like, this is going to be funny when I say it.
Yeah, and I also feel like this kind of ties back to like the Instagram comment, that it is kind of also like funny and meaningful because you have this kind of like interconnection and you both think like the same thing in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it's pointing to some kind of like meta truth almost.
Yeah.
Meta truth.
It's interesting what you were
That
saying.
I would push back on, but
Okay.
what were you
It's
gonna say?
interesting what you were saying. Like the funniest thing to you kind of just comes to you. It's not a particularly
A lot of times,
complex
there might be some
development.
exceptions, but a lot of times, yeah, absolutely.
I would say that like you feel that way because you're not expecting it. Whereas if you're like crafting a joke, you know why it's funny and you're like actively like analyzing it. It's like the same way you could read a really good book or you could write a book and it's going to take a lot more effort and you're going to be a lot more critical of like your process, right? And I feel like that's a question. That's why like in like social situations where something completely unexpected and absurd happens, like, oh, of course it's funny because it came out of nowhere. But at the same time, like a good joke has like a punchline that is so like distracting from like the premise of the original like plot line that also works.
Yeah, right. I mean, I do feel like
Yeah.
I like telling stories in a way. I mean, as Guy greatly complained of like how many layers my stories have. But I
Shout out to the fundraising dinner. Yeah.
yeah, but no, I really, if I have the audience with the patience, which on that night I did not.
Well, it was pretty funny.
If
was
I have
funny
that,
in its own way.
I love building up these layers, and I feel like I'm like putting I'm emphasizing a certain statement now, so it kind of like is rewarded with like the punchline later, so to say. So I do feel like that can also be, I guess, very funny to not just say things in the moment. So I guess for me it's like really funny if it like, I guess, hits the nail on the head. But you were about to criticize that with my meta truth thing.
Oh, I wasn't even gonna comment on that. We can go back to that in a second. I was gonna say I do think that it's at least possible to have this level of like complexity and almost like craft or like I do feel like every once in a while I'm able to like be talking for a very long time, or maybe it's like part of a longer conversation, we're going back and forth, and I still am able to like tie it back around. And like a lot of times it's completely unintentional and I wasn't planning it at all. And like I absolutely love that. And to me that's like kind of the funniest thing ever, but also just extremely satisfying. And I feel like usually when I do that, it's not intentional, it's not planned. But that also means that it doesn't happen very often. That's a very rare thing to happen.
That is interesting because I feel like we've kind of discussed it, and I said that that's kind of what Peterson does and what I enjoy about Peterson, but a lot of people don't. That he like always, has like these kind of plot lines that go on for like half an hour or longer, and then tries to find a way back, and sometimes succeeds, sometimes doesn't. But I think it's just super satisfying if it works out.
That's fair. It's interesting that I don't like Peterson, but that I do like that kind of thing. I do feel like it's nice if it's not forced, if it's just natural.
I mean, yeah,
that's
fair.
It does make it very much an inconsistent thing. But I do like to like when it's almost more like being able to like see when it comes up, like having like I make this connection of like, oh, this is also just this exact thing that I've been saying this entire time.
I feel like humor shouldn't be consistent. Like I guess the one thing where I kind of see that is in the kind of like meme space, to say, oh well, for this kind of like post, this reaction image is just perfect, right? Because it kind of like once again resembles this kind of font that we all kind of have but don't know how to express. But
Yeah.
I guess like true humor is inconsistent because I guess the diversion between punchline and actual setup, as you mentioned, has to be somewhat greater than
Even with what you're saying about like reactions or images or these kinds of things that get used over and over again, I think one thing that can make them continuously funny is that they get repurposed a lot of times. That they do have that the exact same thing has a completely different meaning a lot of times. So I tend to agree with that inconsistency thing. What were you gonna say, John?
Well, there's an interesting. The thing with humor is that I feel like even if you hear a funny joke, like the first time, there's very few things that as you repeat them they get funnier. And usually it's just some absurd comment or like some bit that isn't originally funny, but because you're like stressing it so often, it gets funnier. This is a bit of a sidetrack, but there's this story of like some old mining colony like back in the day. Imagine like the 1860s or whatever back in California, and there's this bar, and they've told the same joke so many times that there's just a book of all the jokes. And instead of saying the whole joke, people are just way more efficient. They've numbered the jokes, right?
I've heard this.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, right? I don't know. Let's say there's 100 jokes. So then a new guy comes in and he reads the book. He's whatever, and then people are at the bar. They're drinking. They're having a good time. And then one guy says, 22. Everyone laughs at the old classic. Oh, what a good one, that one. And then someone else is like a little later, and they're like, 57. Haha, what a good one. And then the new guy comes up and he's like, 40, and no one laughs. And he goes up to the guy he was drinking with. He's like, what? Like, these are the same jokes. How come no one laughed? And the other guy says, well, it's all how you tell it.
That's interesting. Okay, I heard a very different version of a very similar story.
Do tell.
The one I heard was, instead of a bar, it was a prison. And it was the same thing where the prisoners, they told these jokes so many times that they knew all these numbers, right? And so, people, and it was, in the prison, it was like, they would just, throughout the night, they would shout out these numbers, right? Someone would say 22, everyone would laugh. Someone would say 10, someone would laugh. The new guy comes in, he yells out 67. Everyone absolutely erupts into laughter. He's like, and then he asks his roommate, like, what does 67 mean? He's like, we've never heard that one before.
See, that's good. It's a new one.
Yeah, it's subversion. I feel like subversion is a big thing to like refresh that kind of stuff. I do feel like these kind of memes can also be killed when the person that I've talked about this with my English professor, and at great lengths he discussed the issue with like irony dying by like, for example, people made fun
Irony dying?
Like, for example, if back in the day like people made fun of Pepsi commercials, and eventually like, Pepsi commercials embraced that kind of irony themselves. And then that's kind of like they absorb it and they kind of kill off the irony. And it's kind of like every time you make fun of something, then it's like fun till the person you make fun of like actually embraces that. I mean, sometimes I feel like it can get even funnier. Okay, so question.
Yeah, it's very complex.
Have you seen the JD Vance edits on Twitter?
Absolutely.
Of course I have.
Not on Twitter, but
yeah, right.
All over the
place, right? Yeah, and like he's recently posted one himself. And
it was not funny at all.
And I feel like. But
because he doesn't get it.
Yeah, right. But it's kind of like once again, this as soon as somebody the target itself embraces. Although I feel like that doesn't always have the case. Do you know Brian Johnson, the kind of vampire that wants to live to like 200 or something?
Is he like the anti-aging YouTuber?
Yeah,
guy?
the anti-aging YouTube guy. And
I'm not familiar.
It's ridiculous.
Okay, so basically, he has this like super program where like every part of his like day is planned, and he avoids sunlight, and he has like all these different tests and procedures, and he measures his nighttime erections and all that kind of like interesting stuff, right? He has his blood transfers and everything, and like for 2 years, people just like absolutely joked on him, like dunked on him with everything possible out there, and then at some point, like he kind of embraced that culture, of like being just so absurd, but unapologetically, as I'd say, based, and now people kind of like him for it. And also tying back to see how people interpret this kind of like thing, how would you think about this kind of person right now? This is what ties back to like the FOMO I have about not being on Twitter, because I just find that so interesting.
That's a FOMO. That's interesting. Okay. The FOMO aspect can be explored as well. I do want to explore the actual humor aspect of it for a little bit. I think for me, it tends to be interesting how much my own personal state of mind can influence things. If I could hear the exact same joke, and based on my state of mind, it could be the funniest thing in the world, or it could be like kill yourself.
Yeah.
Like,
And also who tells it? And that's another
yeah,
thing.
who tells it? Certainly, but I think that one kind of makes sense, right? Like, some people are able to maybe tell a better joke, or at least tell a joke which resonates more with
Or
me,
like
the way they're
deliver
telling
it.
it.
Like, for example,
Yeah.
my sister, awful at like. So every time she tells a story, she for some reason she starts with like the points, right?
The points?
Like the I guess the sum, not the summary, but like the main point behind the
Okay.
story. It's like an AI summary almost, you know?
Yeah. Okay.
And like she tells the main point, and then she tells the story, and the story is uninteresting because the story is just a setup for the main point, right?
Mm.
So yeah, shout out to you to do a better job. But yeah. I just interrupted you. I'm sorry. Oh.
No, it's fine. I think that's an interesting part as well.
Delivery, right? Who delivers it? How did they deliver it? Like, what do they like? I guess what kind of picture do they paint? How do they like drag you through that picture?
Yeah,
How do they-
absolutely.
Yeah.
Although I do feel like, in a way, the person telling the joke is inseparable from the joke itself. I would say that the same joke told by two different people is a different joke, honestly. That's one way to think of it, at least.
That's a fair point.
I mean, imagine like two different the same motive painted by two different painters. That's kind of how I look at it.
Same motif.
Not just the same motive, but like the same general art piece painted by two different painted by two different painters.
Is that in the sense of, like, if you were to give them the same instructions and then paint the same thing?
I mean,
or...
obviously not robotic instructions, but like, you know, like if you tell the same joke, you probably have
Yeah.
the same text, you have like the same punchline, but still, you kind of, you know, you might add a little line in there, you know, like when you tell stories, sometimes you just add stuff in, right? Not
Even
because it's
dramatic
true.
pause.
Yeah, right. Like honestly, this is okay. So I'm Christian, but
Yes.
I do not see the like Old Testament corpus as super literate, but I don't think it matters. Like I feel like these are, in my personal opinion, which is not representative of like any church out there, these are like stories that were, you know, or like told orally and pushed down through generations of like, because originally it was like not written down, because I guess old, like, don't quote me, but I feel like that Old Hebrew was not like a written language, which might be, I don't know, I'm not a scholar, but so the idea here is that, you know, people told these stories, and like I feel like if I hear stories or like kind of urban legends being passed around, the kind of facts, they always kind of change. You know, are the factually the same? Probably
Yeah.
not. But the point, what I call personally the meta truth, always stays the same. So
Meta-truth,
I do
yeah.
not. I do not care about if the facts, you know, align, because the point of the story is exactly the same, and the meaning behind it is to me exactly the same.
Okay, that's really interesting, because I was thinking of it not in the context of meaning at all, whereas in a way the meaning is actually secondary, and it's in fact the delivery itself which is more important to the joke, generally speaking, whereas the meaning itself and the whole idea of the meta-truth is actually, at least to me, generally a bit irrelevant.
I might have wandered
That's
off on
interesting. Yeah, no, I think it's completely fine. I think because that is maybe something interesting to look into, to like talk about as well. For me, there's an interesting story. I'm sure it's fictional, that I was told. So there's this poetry competition, not about writing a poem. It's about reading a poem, actually. Right. So most of the students, and let's say for the story, all the entrants in the competition are like students, and they each have a mentor. Right. Most of the students do kind of what you'd expect. They read a lot of poems. They practice a lot of different poems and like how they can read all these different poems. And for the competition, they go and they read all these poems. Right? What this one student tries is, or not tries, what the student himself is actually very unhappy about it. What his mentor has him do is he only reads one poem the entire time that he's preparing. He just reads it, then his teacher says, okay, now read it in a serious way. Okay, he reads it in a serious way. The teacher says, okay, now read it in a funny way. And the student's like, I'm just reading this one poem. You're going to teach me another poem eventually, right? And the teacher's like, no. Now read it in a sad way. Right? He has him keep reading the same poem over and over again in all these different ways. And then...
No. Go on.
No, it's funny.
No, go on.
Yeah, so when he gets to the competition, he there's multiple different tellings of the story, certainly. Like, he's able to read this poem and, like, by training in this way, I think the way I was told to me is like he reads it in a funny way and everyone's laughing, and it's this very like serious poem, but he's just so like locked in on this one poem, practicing this one poem, and his ability to deliver that one poem that actually ends up being more valuable to him. I think I missed some details of the story, but that's the main aspect.
Sort of the like, I fear the one kick you've practiced 1,000 times, or like the 1,000 kicks you've practiced once type of thing.
And this was a karate teacher telling me this, so sounds
sense.
about right.
That would make sense.
Sounds about right.
You did karate?
I did do karate when I was a kid for quite a while.
I also did karate as a kid.
Taekwondo.
Oh, what do you feel you got out of those?
Not a damn thing.
What did I get out of it? That's a good question. I did it for quite a long time, actually. I didn't stop until high school. I don't know, though. Like, I definitely don't think I got that much, like, actual fighting stuff out of it. I've never certainly, like, been in a situation where I needed to fight someone. But, you know, there were interesting aspects to it, like aspects of discipline. Definitely also just community, right? Just knowing a lot of people there, I think that was valuable. But did I actually get that much out of it? I don't really know.
Isn't it also like this idea that karate is more of a, I guess, performance than actual like fighting style?
Yeah, I think that is very common. My instructor kind of had the same thought as you, and because of that, he kind of like tried to go the other direction with it and like try to make it less performative. But yeah, I mean, my instructor would totally agree with you in that like a lot of them do become more performative.
Is there meaning in the performative?
Oh.
Like also, like generally not just in karate, but for example, if I guess a lot of people will paint as virtue signaling. You know, if I go out and like, I guess support a cause just by, you know, sharing a picture on social media or whatnot, is there meaning in that, or is it all just, empty?
If you as a person are doing it with no intention of actively changing your lifestyle, let's say you're posting stuff about like the current, I don't know if we can mention this actually with Dr. Mooney, but let's say you're posting things about the current political climate and allegations or just like comments towards it, you don't change your lifestyle at all, you continue acting the same way, same unvirtuous, progressive way, I would say it is meaningless to you. But even the act of you posting it is hopefully raising awareness, right? So there might be some effort to it. I feel like the point of performances is not for you. Like when you're an actor, right, in a movie, you know you're not really, let's say, Edward from, what's it called, Twilight, but you're still emotionally investing other people in the story, right? It is Edward, right?
Wait, no. Zeno was like intensely looking at this water bottle because you were just moving it near the mic like constantly. And I was like, you can physically stop him. It's okay.
I did forget about the microphone part. I was tracing the lines, as one does. But back to what you were saying, of like, I guess like that there is value in just the awareness itself aspect of it.
Well, the idea that like meaning, I say meaning is like a personal thing, typically speaking. But if you're performative, you already know what it is you're trying to convey. The point of a performative piece is to convey that meaning onto other people, right? Like if you're saying like the Bible, if you're saying the creation story, it's not literally that the earth was created in 7 days. It's that God put the same amount of effort in like the rest of the universe in one day as he did like the plants, and then he did the animals, and so on and so forth. God spent as much, like one whole day doing humans and like one whole day doing the rest of the universe. That's the meaning that you're trying to convey out of it, right? So whether you agree with that or not, I personally don't, but that's the take, right?
Yeah, I mean, performance is so like it's so interesting to humans, right? Like we've done drama forever basically, because we just for some reason care about stories. Why?
Yeah.
But why is it like that the stories motivate us to you know, like sometimes when I see a good piece in like the opera or theater or like just a movie or a good song, like, you know, it doesn't like actively change something about my life in terms of like material stuff, but it kind of does. It kind of changes me. I kind of feel like I look at the world a bit differently. So I guess, how does that work?
Yeah, I think people talk a lot, maybe not a lot, but one interesting question is always, to me, is like, what really, really differentiates humans from other animals? In what ways are we really different? I think one big aspect is other animals, other living things in general, at least it's extremely hard to imagine that they like tell stories to themselves, and especially that stories are so central to them, right?
Mhm.
And that, like, I say stories, that could include fictional stories, but also just like the stories of our own lives, right? Like that we have these ideas of like stories and meaning, right? I do think they're very connected things.
Can I have a counterpoint?
Sure, go for it.
If there was I'm not sure on the details of the study, but
Okay.
let's say there was a study on rats, and every time they drank from one particular water feeder, they were fine. And they drank from another water feeder, they got zapped, right? Eventually, that entire population of rats, let's say, got accustomed, and they only ever used that one water feeder. And let's say, after like a period of about a week, they started replacing the rats. One a day, until eventually they were all replaced. But because of the sort of group consciousness of only going towards one water feeder rather than the other, that story, that information still gets passed on behaviorally, even if it's not traditionally what we would call like a communicative sort of effort.
I mean, it
Yeah,
still
that's
is,
a very
right?
interesting question of like how broadly do we take stories to be, and also I do think it's tempting as like to see myself as a great big human over the puny rat.
No, me too,
That
but-
the rat doesn't have stories and I do, and it is very easy to fall into that.
That reminds me of that one Peterson clip where like the one rat goes like.
Yeah. I do think it's very, like, on one hand, it's very easy for me to just be like, yeah, but the rats aren't, it's not a story when the rat does it,
Yeah.
versus it is when I do it. But I do wonder if for the rat that it's like, would the rat come up with a religion about that? If the human experienced the equivalent, humans would make a religion about it.
Mhm.
That's one thing, that's the way I would put it. If you gave that scenario to a human, they would make a god out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I don't know that a rat would. I don't imagine they would, certainly. But
I mean, what do you mean by?
I don't know. I'm not a rat.
What do you mean by God? Because I feel like I wouldn't say that every story needs to be able to be made into a religion. Although I feel like a lot of like cultural, like if we went from this kind of biblical perspective that like you shouldn't have any gods besides God, and you say, okay, well, a god might as well be your absolute obsession with like a Marvel movie franchise, then I do totally see that.
Yeah.
But in terms of making like an organized religion and that kind of, I feel like stories don't. I don't know. I feel like what are stories trying to get at? I
Are
feel
they
like-
trying to get at anything, or are they just?
I mean, I feel like that there's stories that try to get at stuff,
Yes,
and
I
stories
agree
that
with that.
fail to
I
get
agree
at
with
stuff,
that.
Absolutely.
stories that don't try to get at stuff and just to entertain, right? Just for, like to show like beautiful action scenes or just beautiful cinematography,
Mm-hmm.
and and like as we've discussed, there is value in just entertainment and laughter, right? Even if there's no like deeper implications.
I would say the first goal of a story is to entertain, because if you have any other thing to say, if you have a deeper message, and if it's not interesting, if no one's going to invest in it,
Right,
then no one's
yeah.
going to understand your point, right? But fundamentally, you want people to hear the story you're telling.
Yeah.
So, is there a story that that'd be interesting, actually. If it's like, write a story that you don't want to be conveyed. You see what I'm trying to say? A story whose goal isn't to be shared, maybe. I don't know. I guess that's like a
Yeah,
secret.
I do feel like a lot of times stories are kind of like a cry out, like somebody else hear me, right? And it doesn't. Well, I even use the word somebody else. It's not even necessarily about somebody else. It's just about like being heard. It's just about being seen. The stories that we tell to ourselves are they just like certain aspects of ourselves which we want to be seen?
I mean, I guess it's also a form of coping, right? Like
Of
in
coping?
terms, like if I feel like I have something that like personally bothers me or whatnot, but then I write a story about it or something, and then I explore the themes further. I get more out of it. I can just deal with it
You're able
better,
to
right?
bring those feelings out into the
Right.
open, maybe? Would you say that's an aspect of
Basically,
it?
yeah. And like, imagine if I have like a real world scenario that bothers me, and then I write a fictional story based on, so like it's heavily inspired upon that, and then I can like, oh yeah, I actually like heard it on YouTube essay yesterday, and it was basically about true crime shows. About like the problem that most true crime shows have is that most of them, they like try so hard to stick to the facts that you can't really do a lot of storytelling. So there's this other true crime show which the author liked a lot more, and basically what they did is that the three main characters were fictional, so they were like representing real life events, but you could like play with them a bit more. You could actually say, hey, this is what they thought in that exact moment, which if it was like a true person, that people would always say, well, did that really happen? You know, did you really think that? No, actually, it was not factual. You know, that is not true.
So it's like these are fictional stories, but they're based.
But they're
heavily on
more
true
real
stories.
than, because, as I'm saying, the factual kind of sometimes gets in the way of
Yeah.
actually finding out what really should be real, what should be conveyed.
Hmm.
That's what I think is the power of like fictional stories.
Yeah, I think that's kind of why. I don't know if you guys are familiar with BuzzFeed Unsolved. I always really liked that version of true crime stuff where it's where there are some kind of real events, but we don't know what happened. We don't know why it happened. We don't always know exactly who did it. And it does leave room for that speculation and our ability to create our own stories revolving around these things.
There's a very famous book like that. I forget exactly what it's called. I believe it's The Frenchman's Wife.
Huh.
Something
I don't
like
know
that.
that I'm familiar.
I read it in English class in high school.
Okay.
It's like a famous lit book. But one of the like central things that happens is that sometimes the author will just decide, like, I don't know what happened. These characters went in a room and
Huh.
I don't know
That's
what
really
to
cool.
say.
That's
You can
really cool.
and you can develop the story however you want. And like, it's not the end of the book by any means. You see these two characters interact afterwards.
So this is, it's not like a character sees them go in the room and the character's like,
No,
I don't know what happens.
the
The author
narrator.
themselves is like,
yeah, it's all told like
Whoa.
third person omniscient, except for like a couple scenes here and there, and it's kind of, it has a lot of texture to an otherwise, like, I think, kind of predictable book.
And I feel like that
that's
adds,
so unique, yeah.
it makes it so much more in depth, right? Like, there was one time I did a night service with the Red Cross, and one thing we did is that we watched a horror movie to, I guess, keep us up at night. And the first half of the horror movie, you couldn't really see the monster, so to say. There were always like these hints, you know. You could always see like body parts or I guess scratch marks, you know, like signs of devastation. And that was like actually kind of scary for me because like my mind filled in all the gaps of what that could be. And then later on, they showed the entire thing, and it was like not scary anymore because now it's kind of been reduced to this like portrayal on 2D. Well,
So-
before that it was like all in my head, and my head kind of
Yeah.
made it so much more like broad, which in this case is like, you know, the horror case, but it can very much same be in like a more intriguing or like positive or whatever case.
These scratch marks and stuff, this is like, was this on a screen or this is like,
I mean,
I'm a little,
like okay, so like the scratch marks you could see like in the film, like they would be in
oh,
three
it's
or in
part of the
person.
movie, yeah.
part of
Okay,
the
part of
movie.
it,
Yeah,
part
yeah.
of it, yes, I see.
So-
Now I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the unknown. And do you think would you say, and these are two things which are very, very deeply connected, so you don't have to necessarily pick either one of them. Would you say that it's more about specifically what your mind is filling into the gaps or about just the unknown itself?
I'm
I
not
do
sure.
think they're very, very connected things, though.
Yeah,
I don't
definitely.
think they're necessarily that you have to separate them at all, but
I would say it's probably like the latter. Or sorry,
Mm.
the fact that it's unknown and you're scared of what it might be, right? Like a reason we're like.
But even
scared-
then, you said it might be. So, like, do you think that's a little bit still about?
I mean, it's
the filling in the
I
gaps
feel like
itself?
the unknown is a condition for you being able to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
That's also fair.
If you're a kid and you're scared of the dark, you know that there's nothing like in your dark basement, let's say, but you're
How do you know?
scared that there might be. Yeah. How could you know that there's
Yeah,
no one there?
right.
You know? So.
No, when I was younger, I always had this like fear that we had like one vent in our swimming pool. And I always feared that for some reason like the sharks would suddenly like come out of the pool, like out of the vent into the pool.
Yeah, that's horrifying.
Yeah.
I'd be scared too.
Yeah.
Sharks in the pool. Damn.
How do people deal with that kind of imagination issues? Because I feel like that if you kind of do not play with them enough, these kind of imaginations, that they can like corrupt and get out of hand.
How do you deal with that? I think what I would propose is actually just completely accepting those fears, and instead of running away from them, that you should actually just like completely go into them and embrace them.
Mhm.
Yeah, which
Batman.
is a
The
terrifying
Dark
thing
Knight.
to do in and of itself, but I think that really takes the power away from them.
Yeah, I would say a similar kind of vein of like dealing with these fears is like there's this quote, I think it's some Stoic, I think it's Marcus Aurelius. He said, "We
Okay.
suffer more in imagination than reality."
Yes,
Mhm.
And
I've
you
heard
could
this.
just kind of reject the imagination entirely and focus
Hmm.
on like, well, it is in my head. What is out
Yeah.
there? And that's sort of confronting them. It's just addressing the problem, but also
I wonder
just,
if that's at least from the way you're framing that or saying that, I would kind of think of that as being the opposite of what I'm saying. But explain a little more.
I'm saying, like, if you are worried about there being sharks in the vent, you can go and check, and that would be the reality. right, that you're emphasizing.
Hmm.
Or you could just acknowledge that it's
could see that.
imagination entirely and just not bother checking. Either way, the fact that you have to distinguish between maybe a valid concern if you're a child in a pool and like the actual goings on of life. One is imaginative, one is reality, and you have to make that distinction.
Might need to sit with that for a second. There are definitely multiple things that stick out to me there. One thing at the very end is about the distinction between imagination and reality, because to me those things are actually not so clear at all. I don't think there's a very clear distinction there, honestly. I do think there's also some more of the earlier parts, though. I do think something like, like going and actually checking. I think that is a good method to it, sort of. Versus the other one that you were saying, though, of just know that it's imaginary and therefore it doesn't bother you. I do think it might be a little easier said than done.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps it's more not knowing it's imaginary, but recognizing that it's out of your control.
Yeah, I think that can get into more of an idea of acceptance, of this is out of my control and I'm going to embrace this uncertainty.
For me, this kind of entire line of argument has always been almost supportive of hedonism, because I do feel like I know some people, and I feel like they just worry way too much about stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like sometimes they're way too conscious, almost, because I feel like, if you look at it this way, I'd be worried too.
Conscious,
but then
again,
again,
self-conscious or just
more self-conscious,
generally?
generally conscious. So yes, this is awful, but worrying about it doesn't get you anywhere. So it's almost better to just shut it out and do whatever gets you out of this mood and back into the world. So I feel like there's a certain utility in hedonism.
That is true. A lot of people suffer from medical anxiety, and they can't just do that though. So there's some merit to that.
Yeah, that's another thing where the material conditions do actually matter, right? If your fear is, sure, you might be afraid whenever you're there's this whole thing of okay, our anxieties used to be about these physical things, and so your heart starts beating really fast, and you get a little tense, so that you could actually react in a situation where it's physically needed, versus now very rare that our threats are actually physical. Most of the time it'd be more something okay, your boss says hey, I need to talk to you, and then your heart starts beating I might get fired. The other thing is, though, that is a very real fear. If you get fired, maybe it's a situation where, okay, it's extremely unlikely that you're going to get fired. Maybe that's one thing. If you don't, have a way to provide for yourself, then you don't have the things you need. You do, the material conditions of your life are a very real thing. And we do live in a capitalist society. You do have to make money to live. These anxieties are, to a certain extent, real, depending on what they are.
Yeah, I mean,
there might be other ones which are very much irrelevant. They don't actually.
And I feel like what puts us extra on the edge, that I don't know. I feel like everybody has experienced a situation where they were too calm, too coasting, and then experienced something that really brought them down that they did not expect. That for example, you talk to your boss and you think it's all fine, but no, actually, this, or more you think you did really well on an exam and you can just coast for the next couple of weeks, but it turned out way worse than you thought. And I feel like those kind of experiences for me have always integrated a sort of general skepsis into how fine I should be with things. So I feel like that has raised my base level of anxiety and neuroticism by quite a bit.
Oh, those experiences were fundamentally different to you, where sort of what you're describing, as I'm understanding it, is you were so sure that one thing was going to happen, and then it was wrong, to the point where you're okay, now I can't even trust my instincts.
Right.
Now, even everything that I feel completely sure about in my life, now I have to second guess that, because I felt completely sure about this one thing, and it wasn't true at all.
Right. I mean, I do feel like that there is a certain utility in that. For example, I feel like my dad always, stresses out about, being in control of absolutely everything, and not being controlling, but having a grip on absolutely everything, and worrying about absolutely everything. And I feel like on the one hand that is stressful and might lead to, health disadvantages. But then again, my dad has such a solid grip on everything that I feel like if things like screw up, then I go to him because he just he has the firm grip. I often don't.
Firm grip on everything.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Exactly?
That like everything he does is just like like he doesn't leave anything unfinished. And I often feel like okay, I won't care about this problem right now. I'll like postpone it and now deal with this more important thing. But then something unexpected happens, and then these pile up, and suddenly it's like, oh, I haven't done this even, and then I basically then there's this thing I need to do and this thing to do, and then it's like a decision paralysis, and I get so much negative emotion out of like all this unfinished business that I still have.
Yeah.
And
Very
that kind of
relatable.
drags me down. So the fact that he always has like worries about everything, make sure that we never miss any details, any flights, so like he never overlooks a detail because he's like so extremely worried. So and I feel like that is not the most singular optimal strategy, but if you are in a kind of relationship, if you have a partner and you have like one person who's always I guess locked in and worried, and one person who you just like brings a more like calmer vibe, so to say, more stoicism, like everything will be fine, don't worry about it right now.
Yeah.
I feel like that could be effective. Yeah. Yeah. Any other points you want to talk about before we end today's session?
I think we hit a lot of good stuff already.
A lot of good stuff. Yeah.
Certainly, there's a lot more to talk about, but I think that's also good in a way. For one thing, I don't think us talking more is gonna make us have less to talk about. I think that's the funny part.
definitely.
Yeah, we just talked. We kind of just took a meandering route. But
Yeah,
I think
no.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Meandering. Why another podcast? Why are we doing this? Honestly, I don't know.
Another
Because
podcast.
we didn't finish.
Yeah.
There's so many more meaningful things to talk about.
Well, it was also just very enjoyable.
Yeah. I guess for everybody who stuck around till now, we are Great Conversations. We are a philosophy club at Tech. I'm not affiliated with them, so whatever we say is not endorsed by them. So we have meetings in Skiles 311 every Thursday at 6:30.
Yeah, these conversations are basically exactly what you will experience, word for word, bar for bar, if you come to Great
They're all
Conversations.
scripted. We just read them out
exact
loud.
depth, this exact level of detail, yes, all of these things are literally exactly what you'll experience. No, not quite, but I think that's also the thing that makes it cool, is that you really don't know quite what to expect.
Yeah.
And you have the ability to impact it yourself, right?
Yeah, right. And the one thing about our meetings is that we want to involve everybody there through the Socratic method, which means that if somebody wants to ramble on for an hour, they can't, right? Because they need to let other people speak.
Yeah.
So consequently, this podcast is just, a great place to come together and just yap for a bit. So, since this is our meeting series and we try to like dive into what people find meaningful in life, if you have anything meaningful to share, to, I guess, come on the show to say, hey, you probably haven't heard about this, but this is such a cool thing. And, I guess if you knew about it, you'd find life in general more meaningful. Then reach out to us on Instagram. We have, what is our Instagram handle? It's like GT Great Conversations.
I think it's Great Conversations GT.
Okay, never mind.
Let's verify.
You too, dear viewer, can be a part of the podcast.
Yeah, you can. And you'll find the podcast soon, I guess. We hope everywhere where we can get podcasts uploaded. And
Yeah, it's Great Conversations GT _ between each of those words.
Yeah. Guy, any final notes?
No. That was a great conversation.
Chills.
For sure.
Well, very good though, guys.
Yeah. Also, we have food, and on like every second Thursday, our lovely chef Adriano has like
Our lovely.
yeah no he just bakes up
Our.
I just like to eat.
yeah no and he always brings good stuff, so that's yeah. Well, thank you
We
for
have
your time.
pizza at the other ones.
Yeah, it's not quite as good, but it's still free food, so like whatever. So I guess thanks for listening, and I guess
Yeah, I think you can probably cut it off.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Pretty big file, probably.
Yeah.